He was the man no one noticed, the quiet worker relegated to the shadows, overlooked and dismissed. She was the queen of the office, her power unquestioned, her confidence cutting as sharp as her words. For years she mocked and belittled him, seeing him as little more than a pawn in her domain. But what she didn't know was that the tables were about to turn. The man she thought was beneath her, the one she believed would never rise above the spreadsheets he quietly mastered, was about to be named the new CEO of the company. The stage was set for a clash like no other, a battle of power, pride, and justice. And when their worlds collided, the fallout would shake the very foundation of their workplace. Before we dive into this compelling story of power struggles and redemption, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this about resilience, justice, and triumph, don't forget to subscribe. The office was alive with the usual symphony of productivity. Phones ringing in harmony with the rhythmic clicking of keyboards, punctuated by hushed conversations over shared projects. Fluorescent lights flickered occasionally above the polished floors, though no one seemed to care. Among the chaos, Ethan sat quietly at his desk in the far corner, blending seamlessly into the background. Ethan was the kind of person you could pass 100 times without noticing. His clothes were neat but unremarkable, and his demeanor was one of calm efficiency. Though he had worked tirelessly for the company for 3 years, his presence had always been understated. He excelled in his role, producing exceptional work and presenting innovative ideas, yet recognition eluded him. That day, as Ethan sifted through rows of data on his computer screen, the sharp sound of heels clicking on the floor signaled the arrival of Vanessa. Vanessa, in her mid-40s, commanded attention wherever she went. She carried herself with an air of authority, her tailored suit accentuating her sharp, no-nonsense persona. She had perfected the art of dominance in the workplace. Her voice, loud and confident, cut through any room she entered, and her presence seemed to part crowds like a queen crossing her court. Vanessa was known not just for her business acumen, but also for her biting remarks and judgmental stares. She had the uncanny ability to make people feel small, a skill she wielded liberally. To her, people like Ethan were invisible, and when they weren't, they were merely stepping stones. As she strode by Ethan's desk, she slowed just enough to glance at his screen, a spreadsheet he had been meticulously building. "Nice spreadsheet," Vanessa remarked, her voice casual yet dripping with condescension. "It's a shame people like you, well, those diversity hires, end up stuck with grunt work. But I suppose that's how it works these days." The words stung more than Ethan cared to admit. He didn't look up, choosing instead to focus on his screen, his hands tightening around the mouse. He had encountered comments like this before, barbed with just enough plausible deniability to avoid outright accusation. He nodded slightly, swallowing the bitter retort that rose to his throat. Vanessa chuckled softly, a sound almost musical in its cruelty, before walking away. Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the glowing numbers on his screen. He had taught himself to remain composed, knowing that in this office, making waves was often met with swift consequences. It was better to be invisible, or so he thought. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat alone in the break room, staring into the depths of his coffee cup. The liquid had long gone cold, much like his enthusiasm for the day. The silence of the room provided a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. Vanessa's words lingered, but they were merely the latest in a long string of slights and dismissals. Over the years, Ethan had become accustomed to being overlooked. It wasn't that he sought recognition for its own sake. He simply wanted to be valued for his contributions. As he leaned back in his chair, Ethan's eyes wandered to the clock. The weekly executive meeting would begin shortly. These meetings had become an exercise in futility for him. An endless parade of voices vying for dominance, none of which belonged to him. Ethan rarely spoke during these gatherings, content to observe and take notes, while others drowned him out with their loud opinions. But today, a shift began to stir deep within him. He wasn't sure what had changed, but something inside him refused to remain silent any longer. He had ideas he believed could make a difference, and he was done hiding in the shadows. As the meeting commenced, Ethan found his usual seat near the edge of the long mahogany table. The executives filed in, each carrying stacks of documents or laptops, their conversations blending into a hum of corporate jargon. At the head of the table, Vanessa presided like a monarch surveying her subjects. She spoke first, as she always did, her voice commanding attention despite the banality of her remarks. Ethan tuned out her words, his focus elsewhere. His notes rested before him, his hand hovering over them as if summoning the courage to speak. As the meeting progressed, numbers and projections were used around with little conviction. Finally, there was a pause, a rare moment of quiet. Ethan seized it. "I've been analyzing the data," he began, his voice steady but not loud. "If we shift our strategy to target a new customer base, the projections indicate significant growth. It's a straightforward adjustment, but it could yield substantial results." The room froze for a moment. Heads turned toward Ethan, some with genuine curiosity, others with thinly veiled skepticism. Vanessa, however, was quick to react. "Really, Ethan?" she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "You think your little suggestion is going to revolutionize things? Maybe you should stick to what you're good at, numbers, and leave the big decisions to those of us who actually understand strategy." Ethan met her gaze, refusing to back down. He offered a small shrug, his voice calm. "It's just an idea. Take it or leave it." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa dismissed his words with a wave of her hand, resuming the meeting as though Ethan hadn't spoken at all. But Ethan felt something different this time, a quiet pride. He had spoken up, refusing to be silenced, and while his words had been brushed aside, they lingered in the air, unshakable. As the meeting adjourned, Vanessa shot him a parting remark. "Don't get too comfortable, Ethan. People like you don't usually make it to the top." Ethan remained silent, watching her walk away. This time, her words didn't cut as deeply. Instead, they ignited a spark within him. He wasn't going to play by her rules any longer. The game was about to change. The office buzzed with activity as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Ethan remained at his desk, meticulously reviewing the report he had been working on all day. His thoughts, however, kept returning to Vanessa's words during the meeting. Her mockery had been sharper than usual, her condescension wrapped in an air of authority she wielded with ease. He could still hear the disdain in her voice, the smugness in the way she dismissed his ideas without a second thought. Yet Ethan wasn't angry, not in the way Vanessa might have expected. Instead, her words fanned the flames of a determination he hadn't realized he possessed. He thought back to the years he had spent at the company, quietly excelling in his role while others climbed the corporate ladder with half the effort. It wasn't that Ethan lacked ambition. He simply believed in letting his work speak for itself. But what good was diligence in an environment where people like Vanessa held the reins? That evening, the office grew quieter as employees began filing out, their goodbyes echoing faintly in the hallways. Ethan lingered at his desk, his mind racing with memories of the countless moments he had been overlooked. He remembered the time he had proposed an innovative marketing strategy, only to watch his ideas be dismissed, then later presented by another colleague as their own. He thought about the promotion he had been passed over for despite glowing performance reviews. And then there was Vanessa, whose sharp remarks and thinly veiled disdain had become a regular part of his workday. Ethan sighed, leaning back in his chair. He wasn't naive enough to believe that hard work alone would earn him respect in this company. But the weight of invisibility, the feeling of being seen but not acknowledged, was becoming unbearable. In the break room, Ethan poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the air. The space was empty, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. He stood there for a moment, staring into the dark liquid as though it held answers to the questions swirling in his mind. Could he change things? Was it possible to carve out a space for himself in a workplace that seemed determined to sideline him? Just as he was lost in thought, Vanessa entered, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. She carried the same air of confidence she always did, though there was a smugness in her demeanor that seemed amplified after the meeting. "Oh, you're still here," Vanessa remarked, her tone laced with faux surprise. "Burning the midnight oil, are we? That's the spirit. Good workers like you are the backbone of this company." Ethan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Just wrapping up some reports, he replied evenly. Vanessa poured herself a cup of coffee, her movements deliberate. You know, Ethan, not everyone is cut out for leadership. It's a lot of responsibility and decisions that affect the entire company, employees, and stakeholders. It's not something you can approach with, well, spreadsheets and data. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Ethan met her gaze, his eyes calm but resolute. Leadership isn't just about making decisions. It's about listening, understanding, and recognizing the potential in people, even those who don't always stand out. Vanessa's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. That's one way to look at it, she said, her tone dismissive. But trust me, in the real world, it's the boldest voices that get heard. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts once again. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office earlier than usual. The corridors were quiet, and the faint hum of air conditioning was the only sound he heard as he made his way to his desk. He opened his email, his eyes scanning the usual influx of messages, updates on projects, reminders about deadlines, and a handful of promotional emails he had forgotten to unsubscribe from. But one subject line stood out. Congratulations on your appointment as CEO. For a moment, Ethan stared at the screen, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Slowly, he clicked the email, the words confirming what seemed impossible. Dear Ethan, the board has reviewed your contributions to the company and your vision for its future. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as the new Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The official announcement will be made tomorrow morning. Congratulations on this well-deserved appointment. Ethan read the email again, his heart racing. Was this real? After years of working quietly behind the scenes, had the board finally recognized his efforts? A flood of emotions washed over him. Shock, disbelief, excitement, and even a twinge of fear. This was the moment he had longed for, yet it felt surreal. Ethan glanced around the office, the familiar surroundings suddenly taking on a new significance. He wasn't just an employee anymore. He was about to become the leader of this company. The weight of the responsibility settled on his shoulders, but it wasn't unwelcome. For the first time, Ethan felt truly seen. As the day unfolded, Ethan found himself oscillating between anticipation and apprehension. The official announcement would be made the next morning, and he wondered how his colleagues, especially Vanessa, would react. Part of him relished the thought of seeing her face when she learned the truth. He could already picture her disbelief, the way her carefully constructed facade of superiority might crack under the weight of the news. But another part of him cautioned against getting swept up in thoughts of revenge. This wasn't about proving Vanessa wrong, it was about proving himself right. Ethan resolved to approach his new role with the same diligence and integrity that had guided him thus far. He wouldn't let the bitterness of past injustices cloud his vision for the future. As he left the office that evening, Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Tomorrow, everything will change. Ethan arrived at the office the next day before the sun had fully risen, his thoughts racing as he crossed the threshold into familiar territory. Everything looked the same. The sterile white walls, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the soft cacophony of phones and keyboards. Yet to him, the space felt entirely different. This wasn't just the office where he worked anymore. It was the company he would now lead. Clutching a cup of steaming coffee, Ethan found solace in the quiet solitude of the break room. The early hour meant most of his colleagues weren't in yet, giving him time to reflect. He replayed the email from the board in his mind over and over as if trying to convince himself it was real. CEO. The word felt heavy with meaning. This wasn't just an article. It was a responsibility, a challenge, and perhaps most importantly, an opportunity. Ethan had spent years working behind the scenes, pouring his heart into his projects while remaining invisible to those in power. Now, the very people who had overlooked him would have no choice but to acknowledge his worth. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of heels clicking against the tiled floor. He turned to see Vanessa entering the break room, her presence as commanding as ever. She glanced at him briefly, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Morning," she said, her tone clipped. "You're in early." Planning to crunch some numbers before the day begins, Ethan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Something like that, he replied, his voice calm but firm. Vanessa poured herself a cup of coffee, her movements deliberate as she turned to face him. "Well, it's good to see you taking your work seriously," she said, her words tinged with her usual condescension. "This place could use more of that." Ethan remained silent, choosing not to rise to the bait. He knew that in a matter of hours, Vanessa's smug confidence would be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As the office filled with the morning bustle, Ethan focused on preparing for the day ahead. He reviewed his notes, mentally rehearsing how he would navigate the announcement and the inevitable reactions. By the time the official meeting was called, Ethan felt a mix of anticipation and nerves. The conference room buzzed with energy as employees filed in, their chatter a blend of casual updates and curiosity about the day's agenda. Vanessa, as always, entered with an air of authority, her presence commanding attention. She took her usual seat near the center of the table, her posture poised and confident. The room quieted as the chair of the board, a dignified man named Mr. Hartley, stood to address the group. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and authoritative. "Today, we have an important announcement regarding the future leadership of this company." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. Ethan could feel her eyes darting toward him, though she said nothing. Mr. Hartley continued, "After careful deliberation, the board has decided to appoint Ethan as the new chief executive officer effective immediately." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the announcement sinking in. Then, the murmurs resumed, this time filled with surprise and disbelief. Vanessa's reaction was immediate. She straightened in her chair, her eyes wide with shock. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice sharp. "Did I hear that correctly?" Mr. Hartley nodded. "You did. Ethan's contributions to the company have been exemplary, and we believe he is the right person to lead us into the future." Vanessa's gaze snapped to Ethan, her disbelief morphing into something sharper. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, her tone laced with incredulity. "You're telling me that Ethan, someone with no leadership experience, is now in charge?" Ethan met her glare with calm resolve. "It's not a mistake," he said evenly. "I'm honored to take on this role, and I intend to give it everything I have." Vanessa let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "This is a joke." The room remained tense as Mr. Hartley brought the meeting back to order, shifting the focus to the company's plans under Ethan's leadership. Yet, Vanessa's frustration was palpable, her usually composed facade beginning to crack. After the meeting, Ethan returned to his office, the adrenaline of the announcement still coursing through his veins. He sat at his desk, taking a moment to process what had just happened. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Before he could respond, Vanessa stepped inside, her expression stormy. "Do you honestly think this is going to work?" she demanded, her voice low but seething. "Do you think you can just waltz into this position and run the company like it's one of your spreadsheets?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression calm but unwavering. "I've worked hard for this," he said, "and I plan to lead with integrity and vision. If you have concerns, I suggest we discuss them professionally." Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. "This isn't about concerns, Ethan. It's about reality. You're in over your head, and sooner or later, everyone will see it." Ethan stood, his composure unshaken. "Then I guess we'll see, won't we?" For a moment, the two of them stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. Finally, Vanessa turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. Ethan watched her go, his resolve hardening. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. As the day wore on, Ethan began settling into his new role. He met with key team members, listened to their concerns, and began outlining his vision for the company's future. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa wasn't done. Her reaction during the meeting had been fierce, and Ethan had no doubt that she would push back in whatever way she could. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He had earned this position, and no amount of bitterness from Vanessa could take that away from him. The office felt different now, not because of the title he carried, but because of the opportunity it represented. Ethan wasn't just here to survive anymore. He was here to lead. The next morning, Ethan entered the office with a renewed sense of purpose. Though his night had been restless, his determination had only grown. He understood that stepping into his new role as CEO would be challenging, but he was ready to face whatever obstacles came his way. As he navigated the familiar hallways, Ethan noticed the subtle changes around him. Conversations paused as he walked by, and coworkers exchanged glances, some with curiosity, others with skepticism. The announcement had clearly made waves. Ethan had expected tea. Changing rarely came without resistance. Still, it was unnerving to feel the weight of so many eyes on him. In the break room, Ethan poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, using the mundane task to center himself. He was lost in thought when the sharp sound of heels signaled Vanessa's arrival. She entered the room with her usual air of authority, though there was an edge to her demeanor that hadn't been there before. Her gaze landed on Ethan, and for a moment she hesitated about recalibrating her approach. "Morning, Ethan," Vanessa said, her voice deceptively light. "Getting an early start, I see." Ethan turned to face her, his expression calm. "Good morning, Vanessa. Just preparing for the day." Vanessa smirked, stepping closer. "So it's true then," she said, her tone hardening. "You're the new CEO. I thought it was some kind of joke, but here you are, drinking coffee like you run the place." Ethan set his cup down, meeting her gaze steadily. "It's not a joke. The board made their decision, and I intend to honor their trust." Vanessa crossed her arms, her posture tense. "Do you honestly believe you're ready for this? Can you lead a company of this size? Let me remind you, Ethan, this isn't just about doing your job quietly in the corner. This is about making decisions that affect hundreds of people." Ethan's voice remained measured. "I'm aware of the responsibility, and I'm ready for it. Leadership isn't about arrogance and weakness. It's about understanding the needs of the people you serve and working toward a shared vision. That's what I plan to do." Vanessa laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Spare me the cliches, Ethan. You're in over your head, and you know it. This position isn't something you can fake your way through. It's only a matter of time before everyone sees that." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "If you feel that strongly, then let's see how things unfold. But I won't let your doubts or anyone else's dictate how I approach this role." For a moment, Vanessa stared at him, her eyes narrowing. She seemed to be weighing her next move, her usual confidence flickering as she realized Ethan wasn't backing down. Finally, she scoffed and turned away, her heels clicking sharply as she left the room. The tension between them was palpable throughout the day. Vanessa's discontent was no secret, and her loyalists within the company were quick to voice their own doubts about Ethan's promotion. But Ethan didn't let the whispers faze him. He focused on his work, meeting with key departments and listening to their input. He wanted to understand the challenges they faced and how he could help address them. Still, he couldn't ignore the growing undercurrent of resistance. Vanessa's influence ran deep, and it was clear that she wasn't going to let him settle into his new role without a fight. That afternoon, Ethan received an email from Vanessa. It was brief and to the point. "We need to talk. Meet me in the conference room at 9 a.m. tomorrow." Ethan leaned back in his chair, reading the message again. He could feel the tension creeping into his shoulders, but he refused to let it shake his resolve. This was it, the confrontation he had been anticipating. Vanessa was making her move, and Ethan would need to be prepared for whatever she had planned. Bookmark. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the conference room promptly at 9 a.m. Vanessa was already there, seated at the head of the table with her laptop open. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Take a seat," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Ethan obliged, his demeanor calm but alert. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him as she closed her laptop and folded her hands on the table. "You really think you can do this, don't you?" Vanessa began, her voice low and controlled. "You think you can just step into this role and lead like you've been doing it for years?" Ethan met her eyes. "I don't think I can lead, Vanessa. I know I can. The board saw my potential, and I intend to prove them right." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're delusional. Leadership isn't about potential. It's about experience. You've never been in a position like this before. You don't understand the pressure, the responsibility. You're going to fail, and when you do, this entire company will suffer." Ethan didn't flinch. "You're entitled to your opinion, Vanessa. But I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to do my job. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her frustration evident. Do you really think the board will stand by you when things start to fall apart? They might have put you in this position, but they can just as easily take it away. Ethan's voice remained steady. If I make mistakes, I'll own them, but I won't let fear dictate how I lead. I've worked hard to get here, and I'm not going to let doubt or sabotage hold me back. The tension in the room was thick, and neither of them was willing to back down. Finally, Vanessa stood, her movements sharp and deliberate. This isn't over, she said, her voice cold. You might think you've won, but we'll see how long you last. Ethan watched as she left the room, her words hanging in the air like a challenge. As the day progressed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was already plotting her next move. Her departure from the conference room had been too abrupt, too calculated. But Ethan knew he couldn't afford to dwell on her tactics. He had a company to lead, and his focus needed to remain on the bigger picture. Still, as he sat at his desk that evening, reviewing the day's reports, he couldn't ignore the storm brewing on the horizon. Vanessa wasn't done, not by a long shot, and neither was he. The day of the board meeting arrived with an air of tense anticipation. Ethan knew the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just a routine meeting. It was a battleground where Vanessa would attempt to undermine him in front of the company's most influential decision-makers. He spent the morning meticulously preparing, reviewing reports, refining his talking points, and anticipating potential attacks. Vanessa was a master of manipulation, and Ethan had no doubt she would leverage every opportunity to paint him as inexperienced and incapable. As he stepped into the boardroom, he was met with a sea of cautious expressions. The board members sat around the long oak table, their faces a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and quiet support. Vanessa was already seated, her laptop open, her posture exuding confidence. Ethan took his place at the head of the table. His hand and his movement were measured. This was his seat now, and he was determined to claim it. The chairperson, Mr. Hartley, began the meeting with his usual gravitas. "Thank you all for being here," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. "As you know, today's agenda includes a discussion about the company's future strategy under new leadership." Vanessa wasted no time seizing the moment. "If I may," she interjected, her tone smooth but pointed, "I believe it's crucial that we address the issue of leadership first." With all due respect to Ethan, this transition has left many of us concerned about the direction of the company. All eyes turned to her, and the room instantly charged with tension. Vanessa continued, her words measured but sharp. "Ethan is undoubtedly a hard worker, but leadership requires more than diligence. It demands vision, experience, and the ability to navigate complex challenges. I'm not convinced he possesses the necessary skills to lead us through the competitive landscape we're facing." Ethan listened intently, his expression calm. He had expected this. Vanessa was laying the groundwork for her attack, framing herself as the voice of reason. When she finished, the room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Ethan leaned forward, his hands resting lightly on the table. "I appreciate your perspective, Vanessa," he began, his voice steady, "but I believe leadership isn't defined solely by experience. It's about adaptability, integrity, and the willingness to listen and learn. I've spent years working closely with every department in this company, understanding their strengths and challenges. That insight has prepared me to lead effectively." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing, letting him continue. "My vision for this company is rooted in innovation and collaboration," Ethan said, his gaze sweeping across the board. "For too long, we've operated within a framework that values traditional overgrowth. While stability is important, it's not enough to thrive in today's market. We need to be bold, to take calculated risks, and to empower our employees at every level." He paused, letting his words sink in. The board members exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others remaining stoic. Vanessa seized the opening, her voice cutting through the silence. "Bold ideas are great in theory, Ethan, but this company doesn't need abstract visions. It needs results. You talk about change, but where's the plan? How do you intend to implement these grand ideas without jeopardizing what we've already built?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression unwavering. "The plan begins with listening to our employees, our customers, and our stakeholders. It means identifying areas where we've stagnated and creating actionable strategies to address them. For example, our current marketing approach is overly focused on traditional demographics, ignoring untapped markets that could drive significant growth. By reallocating resources and refining our messaging, we can expand our reach without compromising our core values. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her lips pressing into a thin line. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly, and it was clear she didn't appreciate it. "That sounds ambitious," she said coolly, "but ambition without execution is a recipe for disaster. The board needs more than promises, Ethan. We need proof that you can deliver." The room grew quiet again as the board members absorbed the exchange. "Mr. Hartley finally spoke, his tone measured. Vanessa raises valid concerns, but Ethan has also outlined a compelling vision. I'd like to hear more about the specifics of your strategy, Ethan." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. He launched into a detailed explanation of his plans, highlighting key initiatives that would streamline operations, foster innovation, and improve employee morale. As he spoke, he could see the subtle shifts in the board members' expressions, curiosity replacing skepticism, interest replacing doubt. Vanessa, however, remained visibly tense, her fingers tapping against the table in a steady rhythm. When Ethan finished, the room was silent for a moment before Rachel, one of the more progressive board members, spoke up. "I think Ethan raises some excellent points," Rachel said, her tone thoughtful. "We've been operating within the same model for years, and while it served us well, it's clear that the market is changing. Perhaps it's time we did too." Vanessa's gaze snapped to Rachel, her composure slipping for a moment. "Change for the sake of change isn't leadership," she countered, her voice sharper now. "It's recklessness. Ethan may have ideas, but ideas don't pay the bills." Rachel didn't back down, and clinging to outdated methods doesn't drive growth. If we want to remain competitive, we need leaders who are willing to take calculated risks. Ethan's approach might be ambitious, but it's also exactly what this company needs. The exchange marked a turning point. The board members began to engage more openly, discussing the merits of Ethan's vision versus Vanessa's concerns. The room buzzed with debate, the tension palpable. Ethan remained composed, answering questions thoughtfully and standing his ground when challenged. He knew this wasn't just about convincing the boss. It was about proving to himself that he belonged in this position. By the time the meeting adjourned, the atmosphere had shifted. While not everyone was fully convinced, it was clear that Ethan had made an impression. Vanessa, on the other hand, left the room with a stormy expression. Ethan knew she wasn't done. Her frustration and anger were simmering just beneath the surface. Back in his office, Ethan reflected on the day's events. The boardroom confrontation had been intense, but it had also solidified his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his position, he was fighting for a vision of the company that valued growth, innovation, and integrity. But as he prepared for the days ahead, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa's next move would be even more calculated. The battle was far from over. The days following the board meeting were a whirlwind for Ethan. While he had gained some traction with his vision, he could still feel the undercurrents of doubt rippling through the office. Whispers of dissent and stolen glances followed him everywhere, and it didn't take long for him to notice Vanessa's influence at work. Vanessa hadn't made any overt moves since their confrontation, but Ethan knew better than to underestimate her. She was strategic, and he had no doubt that she was already plotting her next step. Ethan threw himself into his work, meeting with department heads and outlining his plans for the company's future. He knew that winning over the employees was just as crucial as convincing the board. Yet, in the back of his mind, the tension with Vanessa lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Late one evening, as Ethan was wrapping up his work for the day, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Rachel, one of the few allies he had on the board. "We need to talk. I found something important. Can you meet me tonight?" Ethan's pulse quickened as he read the message. Rachel had been a vocal supporter of his leadership, but she wasn't the type to exaggerate. If she said it was important, it was worth investigating. He replied quickly, "Where should we meet?" Rachel sent back an address to a quiet cafe downtown, far from the prying eyes and ears of the office. Ethan arrived at the cafe just as the evening rush was beginning to fade. The dim lighting and soft hum of conversation created an air of discretion, perfect for the sensitive discussion he anticipated. Rachel was seated in a secluded corner, her face a mixture of urgency and determination. She gestured for Ethan to join her, sliding a manila folder across the table as he sat down. "I wasn't sure if I should bring this to you," she began, her voice low, "but after everything that's happened, I couldn't keep it to myself." Ethan opened the folder, his breath catching as he scanned its contents. Inside were documents detailing financial transactions tied to Vanessa, large sums of money funneled through an offshore account under the guise of a project development fund. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel leaned in, her tone urgent. "It's proof that Vanessa has been embezzling company funds. I started digging after some discrepancies caught my attention during a past project review. These transactions are carefully hidden, but the pattern is clear." Ethan stared at the pages, his mind racing. If this information was legitimate, it could change everything. Vanessa wasn't just opposing him out of personal spite. She had been protecting her own interests all along. "How did you find this?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Rachel hesitated before responding. "I've had my suspicions for a while. Vanessa's too meticulous and too perfect on the surface. When I noticed the inconsistencies, I started following the trail. Anonymous tips helped me piece it together, but I kept quiet because I wasn't sure who I could trust. After seeing how she's trying to undermine you, I knew it was time to act." Ethan sat back, running a hand through his hair as he processed the gravity of the situation. This was a bombshell, no doubt about it. But it was also a double-edged sword. If he brought this evidence to the board, it could expose Vanessa for the fraud she was, solidifying his position and protecting the company from further harm. But the fallout would be massive. The scandal would rock the company to its core, and Ethan knew it would draw scrutiny not just to Vanessa, but to the leadership as a whole, including himself. "What do you plan to do?" Rachel asked, her eyes searching his face for an answer. "Bookmark." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I need to be careful. If I had handled this the wrong way, it could have damaged the company's reputation. But if I don't act, Vanessa could continue to exploit her position, or worse, take me down before I have a chance to lead." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "I trust you will make the right call. But don't wait too long. Vanessa's not the type to sit idle, and if she gets wind of this, she'll do whatever it takes to bury it." Ethan closed the folder, the weight of its contents heavy in his hands. "Thank you, Rachel. I'll take it from here." The following morning, Ethan arrived at the office earlier than usual, the folder tucked securely in his bag. He spent the first few hours reviewing the documents again, ensuring he understood every detail before deciding his next move. His instincts told him to bring the evidence to the board, but he also knew he needed to prepare for Vanessa's retaliation. She was ruthless, and if she suspected he was onto her, she would strike back with everything she had. Ethan scheduled a meeting with Mr. Hartley, the chair of the board, to discuss general strategy. As they sat in the small conference room, Ethan slid the folder across the table. "I need you to see this," Ethan said, his tone serious. Mr. Hartley opened the folder, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the documents. The color drained from his face as he realized the implications. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice hushed but urgent. "From someone I trust," Ethan replied. "I verified the information myself. This isn't just a deliberate mistake. Vanessa has been stealing from the company." Mr. Hartley leaned back in his chair, letting out a heavy sigh. "This is a lot to process. If this gets out, it could destroy her, and the company's reputation would take a serious hit." "I know," Ethan said, his voice firm. "But if we let her continue, it'll only get worse. We need to act now, quietly but decisively. If we handle this internally, we can minimize the damage while ensuring Vanessa faces the consequences." Mr. Hartley nodded slowly, his expression grave. "I'll convene a meeting with the board. This needs to be addressed immediately." As Ethan left the conference room, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The first step had been taken, but he knew the road ahead would be treacherous. Vanessa was dangerous, and Ethan had no illusions about how far she would go to protect herself. But he was ready. For the first time, Ethan felt the full weight of his role, not just as a leader, but as a guardian of the company's integrity. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about ensuring justice. The special board meeting was convened the following evening. The atmosphere in the room was tense, each board member arriving with an air of quiet apprehension. Ethan could see it in their eyes, the anticipation of something monumental. Vanessa, as expected, was among the last to arrive. She strode in with her usual confidence, though there was a flicker of suspicion in her sharp gaze. She scanned the room, her eyes lingering briefly on Ethan before taking her seat. Mr. Hartley, seated at the head of the table, began the meeting without a preamble. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice. Tonight's discussion is of critical importance and concerns serious allegations regarding misuse of company funds. The room went still, the weight of his words sinking in. Vanessa's composure faltered ever so slightly, but she quickly recovered, leaning back in her chair with feigned indifference. Allegations? She repeated, her tone almost amused. Surely this isn't how we're spending our time tonight. Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm but resolute. It is, Vanessa, because the evidence points directly to you. All eyes turned to Ethan as he opened the folder in front of him, distributing copies of the incriminating documents to the board members. As you'll see, Ethan continued, these financial records detail multiple transactions funneled through an offshore account under the guise of a project development fund. The amounts are significant, and the dates align with major company projects over the past year. The silence in the room was deafening as the board members pored over the documents. Ethan could feel the tension thickening with every passing second. Vanessa sat motionless, her expression carefully neutral. But Ethan noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw and the way her fingers gripped the edge of the table. This is absurd, Vanessa said finally, her voice laced with disbelief. These documents could have come from anywhere. They prove nothing. Ethan met her gaze, unflinching. The documents are corroborated by internal communications and approval logs, all signed by you. The trail is clear, Vanessa. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate fraud. Hartley's voice cut through the tension. Vanessa, do you have any explanation for these transactions? Vanessa hesitated, her usual confidence giving way to something darker. This is a setup, she said, her voice rising. I don't know where these documents came from, but someone is clearly trying to sabotage me. Probably Ethan, considering how eager he's been to undermine me since his appointment. Ethan remained composed, refusing to take the bait. This isn't personal, Vanessa. It's about protecting the company. The evidence speaks for itself. Rachel, seated near the middle of the table, spoke up. Vanessa, these records are damning. If you have an explanation, now's the time to share it. Vanessa's gaze darted around the room, her calculated demeanor cracking under the scrutiny. For the first time, Ethan saw uncertainty in her eyes, a realization that her power was slipping away. You're making a mistake, she said, her voice lower now, almost a growl. This company cannot afford a scandal like this. If you pursue this, it will destroy our reputation. And if we ignore it, Ethan countered, we set a precedent that corruption is acceptable. That's not the kind of company I intend to lead. The board deliberated for what felt like an eternity, the air heavy with tension. Ethan sat silently, watching the members exchange hushed words and weighing their expressions. Finally, Mr. Hartley cleared his throat, bringing the room to order. After reviewing the evidence and discussing the matter, the board has reached a decision. He turned to Vanessa, his expression grim. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. The company will also be forwarding this matter to the appropriate authorities for further investigation. The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone. Vanessa's face twisted with fury. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're making a huge mistake, she snapped. You think this will end with me? You're all complicit in this, one way or another. I'll make sure the truth comes out. Her words hung in the air like a threat, but the board members remained resolute. Ethan met her glare with quiet determination. This isn't about vengeance, Vanessa. It's about accountability. The company deserves better. With one last venomous look, Vanessa gathered her things and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. As the door slammed shut behind her, The tension in the room began to dissipate. Mr. Hartley turned to Ethan, his expression softening. This wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. The board supports your leadership, Ethan. We trust you to guide the company through this transition. Ethan nodded, the weight of the moment settling over him. Thank you. I won't let you down. Rachel offered him a small smile. You handled that well. Vanessa was a formidable opponent, but you stood your ground. That says a lot about your character. Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though he knew the battle was far from over. Vanessa might be out of the company, but her parting threat lingered in his mind. She wasn't the type to back down easily, and Ethan had no doubt that she would find a way to retaliate. In the days that followed, Ethan worked tirelessly to steady the company. He addressed employees directly, assuring them that the leadership transition was under control and emphasizing his commitment to transparency and growth. The response was mixed. Some were inspired by his message, while others remained wary, their loyalty to Vanessa difficult to shake. Meanwhile, news of Vanessa's dismissal began to spread, and whispers of scandal buzzed through the office. Ethan did his best to stay ahead of the narrative, working with the PR team to manage the fallout and maintain the company's reputation. But behind closed doors, he prepared for the next storm. Vanessa's threat wasn't idle, and Ethan knew she was already plotting her next move. One evening, as he reviewed the company's financials, his phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Vanessa's not done. She's gathering allies outside the company. Be ready. Ethan exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. Vanessa's influence might extend beyond the walls of the company, but so did his determination. This wasn't just about surviving the present, it was about shaping the future, and Ethan was prepared to face whatever came next. The fallout from Vanessa's dismissal was immediate and far-reaching. Within days, whispers turned into headlines, and the company found itself under scrutiny from the public and stakeholders alike. Despite Ethan's efforts to contain the narrative, the story of Vanessa's alleged misconduct had taken on a life of its own. Vanessa, true to form, didn't go quietly. She filed a lawsuit against the company, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. The legal action was a calculated move, designed not just to salvage her reputation, but to destabilize Ethan's leadership. Bookmark, go back. The news sent shockwaves through the office. Employees, already reeling from the leadership shakeup, were now caught in the middle of a public scandal. The tension was palpable, with conversations hushed and glances wary. Ethan knew the lawsuit was only the beginning. Vanessa had powerful allies and a knack for manipulation. If he wasn't careful, she could undermine everything he had worked to achieve. In a meeting with the legal team, Ethan reviewed the details of the case. The room was filled with somber faces as the team outlined the potential risks. Vanessa's claims are baseless, one lawyer said, flipping through a thick file of documents. But she's playing the long game. Even if we win, the process could damage the company's reputation. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. Then we'll fight smart. We'll counter her accusations with facts and stay ahead of the narrative. This isn't just about winning a case, it's about showing everyone that we stand by our values. The team nodded, but Ethan could sense their unease. Vanessa's tactics were ruthless, and the road ahead would be anything but smooth. As the weeks went on, Vanessa's campaign against the company intensified. She began granting interviews to select media outlets, spinning her version of events and painting herself as the victim of a power-hungry new CEO. Ethan watched one such interview from his office, his jaw tightening as Vanessa spoke with practiced charm. I gave everything to that company, she said, her voice tinged with emotion. And this is how I'm repaid? By being scapegoated and humiliated? Ethan may have a fancy title now, but titles don't make a leader. Ethan turned off the screen, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. Vanessa's words were carefully crafted to sow doubt, not just in the public, but within the company itself. He knew he couldn't let her narrative dominate the conversation. He needed to take control of the story. Ethan decided to address the employees directly, organizing a town hall meeting to provide clarity and reassurance. Standing in front of the gathered crowd, he took a deep breath before speaking. I know the past few weeks have been challenging, he began, his voice steady. Change is never easy, and I understand that recent events have left many of you with questions. I want to assure you that my commitment to this company and its people has never been stronger." He paused, letting his words sink in. The decision to part ways with Vanessa was not made lightly. It was based on facts and the best interests of this company. I can't discuss every detail due to ongoing legal matters, but I can promise you this. Our focus remains on growth, innovation, and creating a workplace where everyone is valued. The room was silent, the weight of his words settling over the employees. Ethan could see a mix of emotions in their faces: uncertainty, curiosity, and in some cases, hope. "Leadership isn't about titles or power," Ethan continued. "It's about accountability, trust, and working together to build something better. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to lead us into a brighter future." As he finished, a ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first but growing stronger. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a start. Behind the scenes, Ethan continued to navigate the storm. He worked closely with the PR team to manage the media narrative, emphasizing the company's values and long-term goals. He also met regularly with department heads, addressing concerns and ensuring that operations remained steady. Despite the chaos, there were moments of progress. New initiatives began to take shape, and Ethan's efforts to foster collaboration were starting to pay off. Some employees who had initially doubted him were now warming to his leadership, inspired by his determination and transparency. But Vanessa's shadow still loomed large. One evening, as Ethan was preparing to leave the office, his phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "I've uncovered more evidence. You need to see this." Ethan's heart sank as he read the message. He had hoped that the worst was behind him, but it seemed Vanessa's actions had left deeper scars than he realized. He met Rachel at her office, where she handed him a new set of documents. As he scanned the pages, his expression hardened. The evidence detailed additional financial irregularities tied to Vanessa, this time implicating several of her closest allies. "This could change everything," Rachel said, her voice low. "If we use this, we can not only defend the company but expose the full extent of Vanessa's misconduct." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The documents were a powerful weapon, but using them came with risks. If the information leaked, it could further damage the company's reputation, even as it vindicated his leadership. "Thank you, Rachel," Ethan said. "I'll review this carefully and decide the best course of action." As he left her office, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of the decision ahead. The battle with Vanessa was no longer just about personal vendettas. It was about the integrity of the company and the future he was trying to build. In the days that followed, Ethan prepared for the next phase of the fight. He worked with the legal team to incorporate the new evidence into their case, ensuring that every detail was airtight. He also continued to engage with employees, building trust and reinforcing his vision for the company. Despite the challenges, Ethan felt a growing sense of resolve. Vanessa's tactics were relentless, but so was his determination. He wasn't just fighting to protect his position, he was fighting for the values that mattered most. The journey was far from over, but Ethan knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't back down. As he stood in his office one evening, looking out at the city skyline, Ethan allowed himself a moment of reflection. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility. Leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about facing challenges head-on and remaining true to your principles. At that moment, Ethan knew he was ready for whatever came next. The story of Ethan and Vanessa offers more than just a gripping tale of power struggles and resilience. It's a profound exploration of justice, integrity, and the courage to rise above adversity. At its heart, this is a story about transformation. Ethan, once overlooked and underestimated, embodies the belief that quiet strength and persistence can lead to triumph, even in the face of formidable opposition. Vanessa's downfall serves as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how corruption and arrogance can blind someone to the values that truly sustain success. Her determination to cling to power at any cost ultimately led to her undoing, while Ethan's commitment to integrity and collaboration allowed him to emerge as a leader worthy of trust and respect. This narrative also highlights the importance of speaking up and standing firm against injustice. Ethan's journey is a testament to the idea that leadership is not about titles or dominance, but about accountability, empathy, and the ability to inspire positive change. The lessons are clear. Humility and transparency build stronger teams, and success is most enduring when it's shared. For viewers, the story invites reflection. In workplaces and in life, how often do we judge others based on appearances or underestimate the quiet contributors who truly make a difference? And more importantly, are we willing to stand up for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against us? If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Did it inspire you? Did it resonate with experiences in your own life? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you found it amazing, comment with a 2. And don't stop there. Share your own stories with us. Whether it's about perseverance, standing up against injustice, or finding your voice in a tough situation, we want to know. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the meaningful stories we're bringing your way. Your voice matters, and we can't wait to hear it. Share your thoughts in the comments below.